I'm your host, Ann Kelly. Today, I am pleased to introduce my friend Brian Taylor. Brian is a photographer and spent a few decades as an educator and as a director. And today, we're going to talk about his adventures as a creative person, both in the past, present, and if we get to it, maybe even the future. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you, dear Anna. It takes a creative person to know one.
So where are you today, Brian?
I am at home where I live in Carmel Valley, California, and my temperature is probably 40 degrees warmer than yours right now in New Mexico.
So the last time I saw you was in Carmel at the Center for Photography, where you were the director for how long?
5 years, almost 5 years.
What an amazing institution, and passed the torch over to Ann Jastreb.
Yeah.
Well, and you kind of did that because you were ready to kind of fully delve into your own art, maybe just even more so.
That's very true. Yeah. My time as a nonprofit director came after almost 40 years of teaching, as a university professor. So I have long longed to get back to my own art. So it's a real joy now to not be responsible for students or for keeping a nonprofit afloat. So it's really a joy. And I'll show you some of the things I've been doing.
Perfect. And real quick, so you were at the San Jose Institute of...
I was at San Jose State University, California State University in San Jose, and I started off as a professor for many years, and then I became the chairman of the Department of Art and Art History.
And you started working there when you were about 25 years old?
Yeah, right around there. Yeah, might have even been younger, but and when I was in your beautiful state, the land of enchantment, I did my MFA at UNM.
That's right.
And I was very young back then, and it was, I can tell you some tales of that as well along the way. Such a joy. I mean, such a privilege to study with people like Van Deren Koch, who had set up that program directly from the George Eastman House, and then also Beaumont Newhall was there. I mean, I got to sit in a room with 12 other grad students and listen to Beaumont Newhall tell firsthand stories of when Edward and I were, setting up the Nautilus shells, or Ansel and I were in front of the aspen tree. I mean, it was incredible to take the history of photography from someone who didn't use any notes. And if it had anything to do with the 20th century, it was all first-hand experience. So I'm so beholding to those days in your state.
Oh yeah, what an amazing experience. So you prepared some images for us. Perhaps we jump into those.
Let's do that. And I promise to keep this quick and hopefully never a dull moment.
Never.
But I thought I would start off with this image because it's a great place to begin by saying that I had a very conservative and strict upbringing in photography. I ate, slept, and breathed the zone system. So here's a real strict black and white silver print. And I loved every summer to run away from home. This was when I was about 17 and 18. I'd run off to Virginia City, Nevada, and hang out with this master of photography, Oliver Gagliani. He certainly, never became a household name like his great friends Ansel Adams and Win Bullock and others, but Oliver, of all those people, was just right with them in terms of being a maniac for technique. So I became great friends with Oliver, so we'd take off for 2 weeks. I would take a workshop from him, then we'd bash around in my van and go barreling around the Nevada desert. So here's Oliver setting up his beloved 5x7 Deerdorf in front of one of these outbuildings in Nevada. Then I was lucky enough to go off to UNM for my MFA, and am super grateful to have studied with this man, the most intimidating man in the world. This was his usual look to us mere mortal grad students. You'd pass him in the hallway and he would not always deign to recognize your existence. But again, an incredible resource to study with. And I'm so sorry that he went off to heaven's darkroom, several years ago in Santa Fe, I do believe, but he is a legacy for sure, Van Deren Koch. And of course, also at UNM, Beaumont Newhall there with his pal, and I want to give credit, this is a Martha Castanet photograph of these two giants together. And this is another reason why Beaumont Newhall taught the history of photography, first person. And then I went off, was at Occidental College. Before I got my MFA, I was working on my undergrad degree. And Occidental brought this giant to the university. They flew him in to give him an honorary degree in conservation, a PhD. And somehow, and again, I was like 19 when I was doing my undergrad there, freshman year. Somehow they knew I was just a photo piranha, photomaniac. So they unfortunately for Ansel, they put me in charge of taking him around the university that day. And I can give you another great story sometime about when Ansel Adams jumped out of a moving car.
I'd like to hear that story.
Poor Ansel, again, Occidental put me in charge of him, and I wanted to impress him about all I knew of his life. So I got to take him around campus for a day, and then incredibly, this is before insurance issues became a reality nowadays, but they just piled him into my car, and I took him off to the LA airport, which luckily is about an hour away from the university. You have to go all across LA. So for the whole journey, I just told him, and then you were leaving George O'Keeffe's house, and then you looked out your window and the sun was setting over, Hernandez, right? And you didn't have time to take a light meter reading, so you jumped on your roof, So this was like 60 minutes of pain for poor Ansel. So I recall that as we just even got near the LA airport, he goes, "This will be fine, Brian." He throws the door open, just jumps out like at 40 miles an hour. That's how I recall it. And that's how he would recall it too. But I digress.
Was that the last time you spoke to him?
No, I saw him for birthdays and things after that. He always tried to pretend like he didn't know me. I thought I'd just show you some things I did when I was in school in your beautiful state, the land of enchantment.
Yes, you have described alternative processes as voodoo alternative processes. I kind of love that.
Yeah, Chris Easter, when I began and when you began with your cyanotypes, there were no digital cameras. There was no Photoshop. There were no really laptops, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. So this is all very analog. So that was really voodoo, man. We didn't have curves or Command Z, in Photoshop. You can do something, you go, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. Oh, well, Command Z, I'm out,
Right.
There are no do-overs in your world and mine in the beginning. But I was born in Tucson. So I believe every word of Carlos Castaneda, whose books were very popular years ago, maybe 40 years ago when I started reading them. If ever you walk through the Sonora Desert, especially at twilight, you will believe what Carlos said about coyotes coming up and talking with you. Of course, if you took the plants that Carlos took, you'd have lizard. I mean, he used to tie lizards to his shoulder, and they would whisper the secrets of the world to him. On peyote, I think that's probably realistic. This is just an example of early work I did. I was born into the photo world very, very strict, with zone system and precision and treating the photograph as a sacred object, as Ansel did and Oliver and all that whole F64 group. But I am really thankful that I ran into beloved Betty Hahn, who taught at UNM, and also Tom Barrow was there scratching his negatives, which was just radical in those days, radical heresy to defile a negative. So Betty taught me gun printing, and so here is a gun print on top of a cyanotype with chalk pastel in the sky, and even I would rub chalk pastel on my fingers and pat my fingerprints into the sky. So, you and I talk about voodoo photography, and I'm so drawn to it. For me, it's such a joy to see the artist's hand in the work. I have the highest respect for digital printing, and that's taking us places that traditional darkroom photography could never go. But for myself, I'm going to take a stand, in my own work, and I just love making work with my hands, and I adore imperfections, and sometimes mistakes are a real gift. This whole series is about places of magic, so it could contain places like Stonehenge. These are all places that were made by human hands. And so it really meant a lot to me to print them in a process that sort of reveals the touch of a human hand. And I'm a believer, it's kind of an old-fashioned belief now after postmodernism, but I do believe, that a work of art made by hand retains a touch of that human hand, like an aura, really. Mm-hmm. Especially, these are all one of a kind, and you can't quite, I could never reproduce the scratches. This is like a couple of days of work printing a gum print over a cyanotype, and then say my 3 Hail Marys, and then take, an X-Acto knife and scratch those marks into the stones to kind of energize them, maybe kind of imbue some sort of magic to them. Other magical places built by hand with mixed media, things like chalk pastel and watercolors. You could go across the world to Egypt, to the pyramids, or across the Pacific to Stonehenge, but as you well know, Anne, there is no more magical place than places we have in our own country. And Chaco Canyon is as incredible and mystical as anywhere on earth. And of course, this goes back to the days, this was around 1980, before things started getting roped off. Steve Fitch and I rented a house together when we were grad students at UNM, and people like Judy Dater would come by and live with us for a few days, and we'd go out to Chaco Canyon, and at night, in an altered state, I can say no more, and I'm pretty sure one night we saw a dead horse skeleton, like a white horse skeleton, just radioactive in the moonlight. I'd have to check with Steve or Judy if they saw it.
I did not know you lived with Steve.
Yeah. And of course, these are the kivas at Chaco Canyon, where the Native Americans danced to keep the world turning. So I really thought an appropriate way to print these images was handmade, just the way these kivas were made by hand by them. And I continued my love of voodoo photography, or doing photography the hardest way. And so I began a landscape series called The Art of Getting Lost, which allowed me to wander and combine different photo processes. Most of my non-silver work begins as a cyanotype. So here's an image as a cyanotype, process it, then switch to gum bichromate. Gum printing is very finicky, but the reason people are willing to endure that grief is that it's one of the few photo processes that at least allows you to make a photograph in any color that you want, because you make a gum emulsion by squishing any color of watercolor or gouache that you want to into the pot. So you can have brown photographs, black, yellow, green, which by themselves may not be that attractive, but imagine mixing colors and then brushing them on top of cyanotype. So here's a green emulsion. I won't belabor it, but you can see my registration marks out here in the margin, so I can put my negative back in register. And then processing the green run, and then with a very bright safe light, mix up a brown emulsion. And with a brush, it takes maybe a half an hour to do this, but I'm brushing brown emulsion just on the tree branches. And so then you expose that in the sun in a contact printing frame, maybe 10 minutes, bring it in, soak it in water. That's how you develop gum prints. And then after, a day or two of all these layers, you say 4 Hail Marys this time, and you coat it with black, just completely opaque. So after all that work, I can't even see my underlying layers, but I can see my registration marks, which I also have on my negative. So if I can line up my negative with these marks, then my images in register back into the sun, another few minutes. And if all goes well, the black comes off where you want it to, except for in the dark parts, like the shadows. So at the very end, the last thing you can do, maybe the fourth run that you've given this print, you just kind of set the contrast and the shadows with your black.
Gum is a pretty challenging process in my experience.
You're not kidding. You do have to be a glutton for punishment, that's for sure.
Yes.
You know, but photography, you know, I find, and I'm sure you do too, with your great work in non-silver processes like cyanotype, it's half science and half art. So I think you and I we have to be part glutton for punishment, part interested in chemistry and optics and science, you know, and part crazy and
All of that.
part artist. But anyway, you know, when things go right, you and I can create things that could not have been made in any other way. You know, a digital print is not going to look like this. A silver print's not going to look like this. A color photograph's not going to look like this. You can see the texture of the watercolor paper. You know, I print on Fabriano or Arches 140-pound rough watercolor paper, which gives you that beautiful texture. You see these happy accidents, which I think are just a delight to show imperfections. And I will often make books with these pictures. And in a few minutes, I'll show you some installation views of my shows that have presented books as wall art.
I'm glad you included some of the books.
You and I will leave no stone unturned tonight, that's for sure. And this is the land of enchantment. You can again see this is a brush applied photo process. So is platinum. You know, some platinum printers will show you their edges, their kind of raggedy margins that show that a human hand brushed on the emulsion. So I love these imperfections. And I love making books because they're very tactile. I love deckled edges. And here's an underlying page on that book. That book might have been maybe 3 feet wide or so. So I continued on with my love for handmade books. And, you know, I love the book format because it allows you to add text if you want to. And I try to keep it very, very, very minimal, almost like haiku, you know, make every word count. This has pages of text seemingly torn out randomly. And I might as well confess that I am one tight mofo. I think, you know, speaking philosophically, and I think that every artist is born, to use my terms, I've got to come up with better terms, but I think everyone in life is born tight or born loose. And we know who we are, you know? So I mention that because in order for me to make these pages look like they were just ripped out by the wind or ripped out by a madman, believe me, this took me, you know, carefully tearing, keeping in mind, make this look like it was not carefully torn.
Torn like a careful madman?
Yes. And the tragedy is, and of course I'm really generalizing, that's for sure. I'll go out on a limb and you can saw it off on me. But, you know, I do think people are, to use better terms, like we're either born super meticulous or like blessedly forgiving, you know, of ourselves. Whichever way you're born, you sort of secretly are trying, you spend your life trying to be the other person. So I'm like super meticulous, you know, that's, I'm sure, why I was drawn to the zone system. I mean, you can't get more tight than the zone system, even before digital photography.
Or maybe just photography in general. It tends to, in its origin, come with so many rules. We don't always have to follow those rules, going back to the beginning.
You're so right. You know, a painter or a drawer would never go near photography. They would see it in a different way than we do, but they'd see it for what it is. Like, man, before you get to an image, you've got a camera in between you and the subject. And in analog photography, then you have developing tanks, liquids, developer fixer, water. Then you've got an enlarger between you and your final object. Even in digital photography, if you update it, you know, you've got a camera, then you got to process it, then you got to worry about printer profiles and printers and all that stuff. So you're absolutely right, Anne. I think photography is filled with science and optics and formulas. But anyway, I do love this book format. These might be maybe 24 inches wide by, they might be like 16 inches by 24 inches or so. They vary. One of the things I love about books is that I can treat them as books. I can do with books as what they are. They are pages on top of pages. So in this image of a creek near Lake Tahoe out here in California, I can take a picture of the creek, throw a rock in it first to create a little fish ring, and then I can tear out the upper pages to reveal underlying pages that shows these beautiful little, very rare golden trout that are just in a few of the rivers here in this region. Or I can juxtapose two different pages together to kind of create a new scenario. This is called The Good Wife. My wife on one page, with her bow and arrow that my little son made, and on the other page, my little son throwing a fish up in the air. These are all silver prints, sepia toned, but they really are real handmade books. And I really enjoy, the labor. I mean, this is a whole added chapter or two beyond just making silver prints and window matting them. But I just absolutely love the materials. I love thread and I love binding things. And I'm not a professional bookbinder, so there are plenty of imperfections.
Are they one of a kind?
I'll make very limited editions of like 3 or 7, and none of them will ever be the same. None of them will ever have anything close to the same underlying pages. And even, the deckled edges won't be exactly the same from book to book. The stitching probably be different. Sepia toning might differ. But again, I love that too. If someone takes one home, they basically have the only exact version of that. And when people take them home, nobody's ever said this to me, but I'm sure that they said, "Thank you very much, and we'll give you a check for this." And they go home and they immediately get out their screwdriver and pop the back off the frame. These are all plexiglass encased in shadow box frames. True book lovers, bibliophiles have actually scolded me for entombing books. Book lovers want to get their mitts on a book and turn the page. But I actually prefer to show these, I'm sorry to say, where you don't get to turn the page. But if you do take the back off, you'll find it is a book with maybe 10 pages behind each of these visible pages. Like many people, like Sally Mann especially, you have children and you try and incorporate them in your lives. I had a ball with my 2 young sons, and we'd learn how to make paper boats and we'd launch them. Unfortunately for me, this is all poison oak out here in California, but it was fun to take a picture. And this is a silver print, hand colored, but just to prove this ain't no digital manipulation. I'm out there slogging around with my Pentax 6x7 on my back here, my light meter. And I discovered I only get about 1 good float, before my boats sink. So fast shutter speeds are required.
Hopefully you brought a few extra boats.
So true, so true. And here I am, one of my favorite places. I was just there 2 weeks ago in Joshua Tree, and we got to go. We got to.
I've always wanted to go. I've never been, and
that's it.
It's so high on that list of places that I need to go.
Who knows? You and I might talk about traveling sometime during our chat, and I have a good mind to round you up and just other superstar people. My beloved friend Ted Orland out here. He and I go barreling off into the desert now and then. Friends of yours like Chris McCaw goes out to Joshua Tree. Sally Mann is a dear friend of Ted's. She'd come along with us. Lori Verba, Beth Moon. We could have a great time out in the desert being creative.
Sounds amazing to me. I'm in.
Ted and I have led workshops out there, but we're so unprofitable. We don't even want to charge tuition. We just say, show up at this fantastic hot springs hotel and we'll head off into the desert from there. But anyway, just a few more examples of books. Again, doing with books what you can do with books. I find this book format is so liberating because it allows me to show a picture I took in a Boston subway, just kind of a hellish Boston subway where everybody's trying to not be on a bus and subway, you see these people caught in their daydreams. Prompted the title, Our Thoughts Wander. So how can you show what's going on in somebody's mind? So for me, I'm thinking that she's thinking about a much more peaceful place than this rattling, dark subway. So this was the most peaceful picture that I have ever taken, and it's outside the Golden Gate in San Francisco. Each year they have what they call the tall ships come in. These historic schooners will come in through the Golden Gate. So here it is off the California coast. I'm up on a cliff, and it just struck me as such a peaceful scene. And maybe that's what she's thinking of.
What time of year do the schooners come in?
I think it's the summertime. I live farther away from San Francisco now, so I'm not up on if they've come in lately. Sometimes I think they only come in every couple of years or so. And as a matter of fact, somebody's going to write in and correct me on this, and I welcome that. I think, these are real old-fashioned big ships, and they may have to come around like through the Panama Canal, or to get from the East Coast to the West Coast, they got to do it for real. So they do it every few years, and it is so enchanting to see these old ships come under the Golden Gate Bridge. And of course, 1 million people turn out for that. But here's just another installation view of what these books would look like. And if photography weren't hard enough for one lifetime, I've kind of dabbled in poetry as well, which is hard enough for a whole other lifetime. But I'm crazy enough to try and express myself in those two different media in some lame way. And I won't take our time right now to read any of these, but these are more like folios than they are books, but they don't have underlined pages. This will be a scene I took of a really damaged desk in a school room. And this was one of my first poems that I wrote when I was chair of an art department, and I sat around a table this size with other tenured professors, and we had to go through the dossiers of the excellent young professors coming up after 6 years of really hard work. They submit their dossiers to get tenure, and we fat cats are going to decide their fate, whether they get tenure. Usually if a professor doesn't get tenure, they have to leave, after 6 years. I mean, this is academia. Anyway, some of these are on my website if anybody wants to.
I was going to ask if people want to read them later, that most of them,
yeah,
or some of them at least, could be found there.
I included this one because it's so photographically related. This is something we photographers can all relate to. This is the beloved and magnificent Tina Modotti. And I ain't the first one to photograph her, if you know your photo history. Actually, this is not Tina Modotti. This is my patient wife in a wig, in a kind of a Italian brunette hairstyle like Tina had. But we all know Edward was the one to make those incredible pictures of his lover, Tina Modotti. So I wrote a poem kind of from a teacher's standpoint called Touching Tina Modotti. My relationship with her would be touching her just like this with a cursor, wondering if this is dust on the reproduction. And the book picture that I photographed, for my history slide lectures, was there dust on the book cover. Should I just, effortlessly take that out in Photoshop? So this is all about my chance to touch her, which is unfortunately just about removing dust. But
it's a big thing in photography, I gotta say, dust.
Isn't that true?
In film photography, yes.
You're so right. You're so right. And again, but my patient wife, sometimes I'll get these ideas that I want to make visible. And we all know the story about that Russian scientist Pavlov, who discovered, when you ring a bell, you can make dogs salivate. If you ring a bell and give them food enough times, then all you have to do is ring the bell and they'll salivate. So he was, a pioneer in that human, or not human, but animal reflex. So I thought, what if Pavlov had a wife and she kind of spoiled all his test subjects? She might be kind of ruining his experiments if she brought the dogs into bed and they slept, on the bed and all. So these are just things that are on my mind. And my wife is not the only one I torture. Anybody who ends up being a son of mine has to go out and act like a deer, even though the mosquitoes are biting the poor little guy. Of course, this is the film days, which I still love. This pandemic has been a hardship. It's been hellish on most people. But for an artist, it's not so bad. That's all we artists have ever wanted, is to just spend time in our studio. So that's what I've been doing, and so many other artists. So I'll just come down the home stretch and show you some of the things that were done in the last few months. I took a hankering to return to voodoo photography. So I returned to cyanotypes, and I had the pleasure of being on Cumberland Island just about exactly a year ago with an unbelievably creative group called Tribe. They are spearheaded, no pun intended, with spears and incredible strong women. Lori Verba and Ann Berry are the ringleaders of Tribe, and they've done incredible things, creating community and teaching these workshops on Cumberland Island off of Georgia. It's just a few miles off of Georgia. So we all went off there, Ted Orlin and I, and about 10 other amazing people. And we just were creative for 10 days or so. This is a real fox. I mean, this really is a real photo. I'm not saying it was alive, but Ann Berry brought her, what they call soft mounted. Never knew there was such a thing. Lori has a soft mounted coyote, if you can possibly believe it. That means they're taxidermied, but they're beautifully done. It's probably very expensive. So Anne brought this, and like, if you put this fox on your shoulder, it was a fantastic picture. If you just put it under a tree, it was a fantastic picture, because it was a real fox. So I had this one curled up on a bed. Before I made this picture, I'd been working on another thing that's rattling around in my beady brain, and I would watch my dogs sleep. We all do, who have dogs, and they start twitching in the middle of the night, and I really think they're dreaming. Maybe they're chasing something, they're woofing, and just the thought came to me. I thought, maybe if God dreams, maybe God dreams in sleeping dogs. So I took all kinds of pictures of my dogs. Nothing worked. And this is such a great lesson, that if you're totally frustrated and you're just failing, wise people tell us, psychologists tell us, that your brain is continuing to work on these problems that you're trying to solve. So I had to stop on my warpath, trying to get a great picture of my dog sleeping. And I went off to Cumberland, a little bit disappointed that I had to stop what I knew was a good idea. And lo and behold, best thing that ever happened to me was to stop, to shut up, and stop going down that road, go to Cumberland, and unbeknownst to me, it's going to be a fox. It's going to be a fox that's dreaming. So I think that's very inspiring.
That photo you were trying to make at home got made.
You're right, Anne. I think before we go 1 inch further, are you a dog woman or a cat woman?
Dogs, 100%. I've had dogs my entire life.
Here's some critters. This is almost a typical scene on Cumberland. I mean, there's just magic all around with the wild horses that are on that island. I do like to show my titles if they're important, but I'm left-handed, and I'm using a quill pen and liquid acrylic paint, which is just a total curse if you're left-handed and you love fountain pens or longhand, because as we lefties know, all you do is you just completely smear what you just wrote. If it was a fountain pen or an ink pen, you end up with blue all over your left hand. You know who you are. It's amazing how many of my friends are left-handed. It's unreal. Good people. I think lefties find each other. You wouldn't happen to be left-handed, eh?
I am not. No. Snowboarding, I am left-handed.
Oh,
it's called goofy. I basically snowboard like a left-handed person. So I'm a little ambidextrous when it comes to
But here's the final destination for that print. Those horses, there are things you can do to cyanotypes, as you know, with toners things like tea or sodium carbonate. You can kind of sepia tone cyanotype. So this is kind of selectively toned here and there to warm it up. And I showed my stitching here to kind of echo, you know, a horse's tail down here. And really coming down the home stretch, we stayed in a mansion. You should take a pig's fly retreat, and they have access. You get your own private chefs, these incredible cooks. It's unbelievable. But we stay in an old Carnegie mansion. The Carnegie family basically owned Cumberland for a while, and they built these fantastic mansions. Most of them are being let go into ruin, photo op, as these beautiful white stucco mansions become distressed. But this was a second story little room, and I walked past it, and for some reason the thought occurred to me, this looks like Emily Dickinson's bedroom. I mean, you know, I'm way off, but that's the thought, and I'm sticking with it. So I began to prepare this to be Emily Dickinson's window. She wrote all her poems while sitting at a desk. The thing that's really historically not true about this picture is that there would be a desk in front of her window. But she did write all her poems on little modest scraps of paper, shoved them in her desk drawer, never expected any fame, never sought any fame. And of course, she's, you know, one of the great poets of the last 3 centuries, going back to the 19th century. So when I saw this, I scribbled down some words on small pieces of paper, crumpled them up, put them on the floor, and then just grabbed, at this retreat, we all made each other a deal. We don't have any professional models, but if you need a male model, I'm in, you know. And so I grabbed a nice woman from San Francisco, Ann Walker, and I said, Ann, you got to do this. You know, you got to get in a nightgown and pretend you're Emily Dickinson. Luckily, there was a feather quill pen around that kind of sealed the deal that this was the 19th century. And so this became a book as well. And I try to make use of the book format. If you're going to frame a physical object that has pages, then that book might actually be dropping it. There might be something letting loose, showing in the underlying pages. So this is one of those little yellowed scraps of paper that could have well been what she wrote her poems on. So I went through her poem titles, and I tried to find one that would be appropriate for this picture. And lucky for me, she wrote a poem called A Cloud Withdrew from the Sky. Thank you, photo gods and Emily. And the last little thing the most recent things I've been doing during the pandemic, you know by now that I love handmade books, but I adore artist sketchbooks. And I especially adore artists who are way the hell more talented than I am. I mean, what's not to love about a Delacroix travel sketchbook from Morocco? Oh my God. Watercolors, you know, India ink pens, you know, from the 19th century, his journeys, his memories. Oh my God. So foolishly, I'm trying to make my own artist sketchbooks. So during the pandemic, what the heck, you can't go out to eat here in California. So I open up, I was actually visiting your dear friend, Anne, your dear friend. I went over to Linda Connor's house when I was director of CPA to pick up some of her artwork for a show. And on her table, I mean, the gods, you know, gave me a break. On her table was a beautiful book, which I immediately purchased, called The Sketchbooks of the Explorers. Unreal. And so during the pandemic, I tried things that I am not good at all, but as other artists have said, this is a perfect time to go down those roads you've been wanting to explore. Nobody's looking over your shoulder. This is the time to take chances. So here I am trying to imitate or be an apprentice to a great watercolorist. This is Joshua Crystal. So this is my lame attempt. This is actually his 1807 watercolor, and this one you will never see again. This is my lame attempt.
Watercolor is very challenging. So
you're so right.
Very unforgiving.
That's true. This is the good one, the real one, 1807. But, artists, especially painters, but we photographers do the same thing. You could say that painting is a huge succession of making decisions, and look at these decisions he had to make. Now here's a guy who is loose. There was no mathematical formula on how this should be the edge of a cloud. And he could never do these clouds a second time, but he made exactly the right decisions, with his hand and his intuition and with decades of skill. And I just don't have that in me, and it kills me that I don't, but I'm a really clunky painter. But I'm willing to work. And so here I am, everything from Van Dyke prints to cyanotypes, silver prints, hand coloring, watercolors. But by God, I am going to make my own sketchbooks by hook or by crook. And these are my coyote friends in a park across the road from me, out in Carmel Valley, a place called Garland Park, and it has coyotes in it. And this picture was brought to you by Carlos Castaneda and Medicinal Plants. And I wanted to convey to you a scene in my mind, a scene that could have happened. And so this picture is actually called Castaneda's Friends. And it's a fiction, but I took this picture, printed it, watercolored it. Again, imperfection. You got to be open to chance if you're a watercolorist. But I did actually painstakingly draw these coyotes in with other art media, a little bit of watercolor, but a lot of colored pencil in there. So when you're born tight, you tend to do these things instead of the right sane thing, and I just like loosen up a little bit. But anyway, so this is one of my most recent artworks, Castaneda's Friends. And I'll sign off by reminding us that what goes around comes around. My old teacher, Van Darren Koch, from almost 45 years ago, when I graduated UNM and got my teaching job in California, Van left. And 45 years ago, he had faith in this squirrely grad student of his, and he collected some of my cyanotypes for the museum. And I haven't seen them in 45 years until a new curator blew the dust off of them for a show about cyanotypes from their collection. This was about, in the early part of this year. It was a show of cyanotypes from the collection. Here's Anna Atkins. I mean, I'm thrilled to be hanging down the row from her. This is mine here on the right, done in New Mexico many moons ago. But the moral of the story is, if you live long enough, you might actually be able to see your artwork dusted off and put on display. And I'll leave you with inspiration from two great people. Henry Miller. This is probably my favorite quote as a creative in the creative arts world. Of course, we know Henry Miller as a writer, but later on, he took up watercolors and he said, damn it, paint as you like and die happy. I think that's fantastic.
I agree.
I give that to you, and in all the millions of portfolio reviews you give, and you're sitting so patiently with people, and it looks like you might have broken somebody's heart, you should say, damn it, don't listen to me, paint as you like and die happy,
I agree.
I know you've told people that in your own excellent way. You're a beloved reviewer. This is fantastic advice from Julia Margaret Cameron. As you know, one of the great women photographers, great any gender photographer of the 19th century. When we're angry or depressed in our creativity, we have misplaced our power. We have allowed someone else to determine our worth, and then we are angry at being undervalued. Let us never give up our own confidence, our own power, our own momentum in our art. And then my advice, make a lot of art and throw a lot away.
And I will go for it.
Yeah, you got to do it. I'm big.
So,
I'm big into crashing and burning, crash and burn, crash and burn.
well, I think that's the thing about art making is you just kind of have to go for it and do what you're inspired to do, but then editing is huge.
You're
So
so right. You're so right.
why not make it? But then maybe stepping back from whatever you've made and spending some time with it and deciding if that's something you want to keep or not, or sharing it with other friends. But why not just make it? And I'm so delighted to hear you've been delving into watercolors during the pandemic because, like you said, why not just do that if it's of interest?
Isn't that true? You know, have courage. I mean, it's a very painful and foreign feeling to become a child again or a beginner, you know?
Oh,
And,
sure.
I've often thought that teachers, you know, people that are you know, dedicated professional teachers should, like every couple of years, sign up for just a community college class or just an online class or, you know, a not for credit class. Teachers should take up something that they're no good at to remember what their students feel like when they take a beginning photography class or beginning piano class or beginning writing class, you know?
Oh, yeah. I love that idea.
We'd be much more understanding because a bad teacher is an impatient teacher goes, I've been doing this for years. Why can't you do this? You know?
Well, sometimes you lose perspective a little bit. I have to kind of catch myself sometimes when I'm talking about photography or other things I know about.
Yeah. And you know, we've been talking about my gallery director experience, but you, my dear, you know, in your way, you've met so many people, hundreds of people. You've had to talk about a lot of things, talk about what they bring to you. I'm sure you are humanitarian. You're always trying to inspire people. No matter what, keep going. You and I could be totally wrong if we didn't like their work, you know? I tell people, listen with one ear open and one ear closed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just because I love your work doesn't mean everybody else is going to, or vice versa. That's just kind of how it goes
That's true.
generally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
We all bring our own selves to every meeting.
so you have a really interesting Zoom background that you were starting to tell me about. Do you want to tell us more about your Zoom background?
Well, actually, this is a living room in that Carnegie mansion on Cumberland. This is called Stafford House. And it's still.
So one of the things I like to ask a lot of my guests about, as you've suggested, is travel. And I must say, just in the course of our conversation already, you've already added a few places to my list of places I want to travel.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thank you for that. And included in that is even just watching the ships sail into San Francisco, because that sounds amazing. I had the opportunity to visit San Francisco once a year for the past decade or so, and have just always loved watching the ships sail around on the ocean, particularly from the Art Institute, but also walking around the wharf and looking at some of those clipper ships they have on display. I'm gonna have to figure out when that's happening. But I am curious if you could travel back in time. So we're not talking about traveling now. If you could travel back in time, is there a particular place or time that you
Wow.
would pick?
Wow, 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 wow. Well, I'll tell you what, time travel, and this will answer both of your good questions. I've never been there and I'd love to go now, but I would really love to have gone maybe 100 years ago. I'd love to go to Angkor Wat, you know, where those statues are being taken back. The earth is taking back the statues by those incredible trees and plants. Now, you know, Angkor Wat does have a reputation for having tour buses, you know, pull up at sunrise and take over the place, but would have been a joy to be there years ago. And a dear friend of mine, Rick Marai, who was my assistant director at the Center for Photographic Art, leads tours, and he was there just when the pandemic broke out. And this pandemic, I mean, if you timed it right, it was really a risk, but if you timed it right, just, at the start, uh, it would have been a great time to go places that were very touristy because they weren't there.
Right.
But we've kind of missed that opportunity now to get on a plane as we talk here in December 2020 when there's like more COVID cooties around than ever. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to go to Angkor Wat. I would have loved to go into the pyramids years ago. I would have loved to go to Stonehenge before they roped it off. I envy 19th century travelers who often did damage to a place. I mean, there were the bicyclists who trashed Yellowstone, when bicycles were just invented in the late 1890s. And so the bicycle clubs sprung up, and these bicyclists would take off across the landscape and break off a nice chunk of, 10,000-year-old stalactite or stalagmite. So I acknowledge that it was uncool to have a picnic on top of the Stonehenge stones, but it would have been pretty cool too.
I hear you.
A couple of weeks ago when I was in Joshua Tree, I did have the very rare experience. I did come upon an old miner's cabin that he built under a giant boulder. And I am not by a long shot the first person to discover it recently, but nobody's quite telling anybody how to really find it in Joshua Tree. But I'm telling you, Anne, the joy is walking under this boulder into this old miner's cabin. It's probably 100 years old, and everybody has been so respectful. All his dishes are on the shelves, rusting. His bench is there, his stove is there. He dragged a glass window up this mountain and he put stones around this window to create a glass window. Nobody has broken his window. I mean, it's like perfectly intact. And it gives you the feeling it gives you the feeling of being in the 19th century when you can walk in to a magical place and it's not chain linked off.
Well, that's like a little bit like time travel.
Yes. Yes.
In a way, yeah, in the current world. So that's
so
a great answer.
So rare. Yeah.
All the more reason I need to go to Joshua Tree, which has been on the short list for so long. And I think that's one of the things about these weird pandemic times is I think once the gates are open and we're able to do that, I think I will be so ready to go to Joshua Tree.
I think so.
Before it was always like, oh, I'll go there eventually, someday it will happen. But now it's like, no, if you can go now. Awesome. So I'm curious, do you have any current favorite movies or shows you might have?
I do. And you're raising a great point. You talk about movies and series. It's amazing how we can't, at least in California, and I don't think anywhere, are 200 people going to pile into a movie theater and sit next to each other right now in December. No. But movies have kind of morphed into series. I mean, you and I thought nothing could ever top a 2-hour blockbuster movie, but many of those actors, Hugh Grant and others, are leaving the movies to create a 7-part series like The Undoing on, I think it's HBO. That's a good one. And of course, The Queen's Gambit you've seen, and The Crown, and all those are excellent.
I haven't seen those yet, but they're on my.
Oh yeah, I think you should see The Undoing. That's pretty good. It's an unbelievable, twisty 6 or 7-part series. But in terms of a movie, I'm telling you, it has become definitely on my most favorite list, top 3 maybe. You have got to see on, I think it's Netflix, or Amazon Prime, one of those. But you got to see. It's such a weird title. You got to see My Octopus Teacher.
I heard that was amazing.
You'll see a preview and then you kind of think, yeah, I'll see it someday, but I urge you to see it. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable because because the photography is unreal. This guy has no scuba gear and he's always free diving, holding his breath, going down and making friends with this amazing little octopus. You know, beyond the photography, beyond the incredible story of kind of from start to finish of this octopus, spoiler alert, this guy is narrating it. And often he's on camera like you and I are right now, no notes. He's just heartfelt narrating it. I mean, if artists are watching this and you want to see somebody really talk beautifully about their art or about life, or you want to talk about see somebody who's being a humanitarian and being incredibly honest, this is the guy. Not not a word out of place, perfectly relaxed, honest, incredible narration of his relationship with this octopus. Poetic, unbelievable.
Well, I'm definitely checking that out sooner than later. And then collecting.
Oh,
Is there anything you collect?
you know, you and I have friends all around us with incredible collections, like the greatest seashells, the greatest rocks, the greatest masks, you know, the greatest birds' nests, you know. I mean, as you know, everything is collected, toys, cookie jars, you know, Aunt Jemima, you know, ceramic pieces. But I'm trying to simplify my life. So I don't have groups of the same thing, but to answer your question, my one sickness is luggage. I'm like a bag junkie. I have like every man's Filson bag that has ever been made, you know, field bags and knapsacks and stuff. So I have too many damn bags and it distresses me.
Well, but that's useful. So it's a collection that's also functional.
I've often thought of lying down on a couch and paying somebody $400 an hour to explain my addiction. And if I had to offer, uh, um, you know, an explanation, I would say that by luggage, I mean like a really cool messenger bag, you know, really cool backpack. Um, I think that it symbolizes taking a journey. I mean, luggage is all about going away from your home, getting out there. So it's possible that my addiction, you know, is not so bad. You know, it's symbolic of me wanting to have an adventure.
That makes sense. I mean,
I
like I
mean,
said, it's yeah, something you're maybe a little obsessed with, but it's got that function and it's gonna get you back to New Mexico to eat some green chili or something like
oh
that.
my God, we'll go to Sadie's and
Mm-hmm.
our hair catch on fire.
So good. That's one of my favorite restaurants in Albuquerque for sure.
Steve Fitch and I and others would go there when we thought we had a New Mexican winter cold coming on. We'd go to Sadie's and just get the extra green peppers, and just like every germ was just like leaping off of us, away from us when we started eating that.
Oh, and they make the best salsa too. I
Yeah.
actually discovered the salsa before the restaurant, even. I think a friend came over one day and saw the salsa in my fridge and told me, did you know there's a restaurant in Albuquerque? And I think I went the next week because it's so good. So
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Speaking of New Mexico, you've photographed Burning Man at least a few times, if
Yeah.
not more. And Burning Man was originally inspired by Zozobra, which is an event that's happened in Santa Fe for about 90 years now, where
Wow.
we
I
build
didn't.
this, I think it's maybe 60-foot marionette, and he gets burnt once a year. And I've been told, anyways, that that was what inspired Burning Man. And it's kind of a different feel. I think Zozobra is a little more family, one night New Mexico style, and Burning Man usually goes on for, is it a week or more? I still haven't gone to Burning Man.
I do hope you have a chance to go. It's a life experience that that will it's a total life experience. I've been maybe 10 times, and first time is unimaginably incredible. You know, you'll be safe, everything's okay, there is some suffering, by day, heat and dust storms. Be prepared to be completely covered in flour, so to speak, the playa dust, but that's okay.
I can do that. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, you'll wash up okay. At Burning Man, I never tried to make art out there. Some people have done beautiful kind of I think the only great art would be documentary art, like at dawn when nobody's out there, but all the sculptures and everything are there with the sun rising. And there have been some books and monographs done, but I'm just in so much awe over what other people have done that I never feel that I can claim it as my own, you know? So I've never come back with anything that I would call my own art.
And I think too, with things like that, sometimes it's kind of that you kind of have to make that decision. Am I here to photograph, or am I here to be here?
That's a very interesting, distinction about. I mean, Zen masters tell us, to be here now, and it's a tough subject because I was about to say that when you raise a camera to your eye and you're concerned with aesthetic composition, you're not being there now because you've got something in between you and the experience. But on the other hand, to defend us photographers, I am never more in the moment than when I'm photographing. And I think that it's almost an addictive feeling in a really good way, totally beneficial way. I'm not sure every photographer is aware of it or would admit it, but possible, consciously or not, does finally make us be aware of just this minute, not what I did a minute ago, not what is going to happen a minute from now, but just this minute. And that's, I think, one of the few times in our day that we ever do that.
I guess, yeah, that's the other side of it.
But I think when I go to Burning Man, I don't raise a camera up too often. What you really want to do is be there right that second and really be there so that it's almost like, I try to be in the moment, and it's very difficult, at least for me, super difficult to be just right here, just this minute. I mean, really convincingly, but I find if you can do it, it's almost ecstatic. It's almost ecstasy to that. It's so rare, even when you try and meditate. I mean, I take my hat off to somebody who can not think for like 5 seconds without it some thought intervening, like, wow, I'm not thinking. That's great. Oh, wait, that was a thought,
Right, exactly. Yoga is a practice that's important to me, and I think kind of early on and get to maybe the end of the practice, and then you start thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner or something like that, and then you go, oh, and then you're mad at yourself for
but
doing that. But you know what? It's okay. I think we did not be so hard on ourselves. And
the masters would tell you being mad at yourself is just a thought,
right. If you're going into Shavasana and you start thinking about carne adavada.
Oh my God. That's
okay.
Mix languages like that.
Well, okay. Realistically, I've got a crock pot of carne adavada going right now.
Oh, yeah. See, I thought that was Sanskrit.
That was the only reason I used that as a specific
oh, that does smell good.
example. Yeah. If I wish you could smell the carne adavada.
A Zoom feature.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So these are new Zoom features I'm hoping for: smell, and then music.
Hey, Anne, you've conducted so many interviews with so many different personalities. Your job will be choosing the soundtrack that matches that interview.
That can be tricky.
I'm sort of thinking, for me, what you've had to endure tonight, I would go with like the soundtrack from Jaws, like like
that's a great soundtrack.
Realizing that most of our audience has no idea what Jaws is, but
God, I hope not. And if that's true, we're going to do a whole episode on Jaws. So actually, speaking of music, do you tend to listen to music when you're making art?
In the darkroom, I'll put on music. And I've gone through, I love your biography, Anne Alleen's mixtape on Lenscratch of you. You confess to listening to classic rock and Pink Floyd. That good for you. And I'm with you. You know, I wore out the grooves on a CD, if that's even possible, of Peter Gabriel. You know, I love Peter Gabriel, so ethereal. But nowadays I'm listening to jazz. I love fusion jazz and almost like acid jazz. I mean, just really, you know, free form jazz. I love, which would include some Miles Davis and Coltrane. So I'll listen to that without lyrics. I recently, I hate to confess this. I hate to confess this as like a seemingly badass artist. There goes my tough gangsta cred right now. But I'm telling you, I've really been enjoying Taylor Swift's new album, Folklore.
Mhm.
I just love. But did you see a lot of people click off on that?
Well, I've never, I actually haven't really spent a lot of time listening to her music, but I have friends that are musicians that I really admire, and a lot of them have mentioned her name recently. So
Wow.
that actually makes me think I probably need to see what you guys are talking about.
I know. I don't want to dwell on Taylor Swift because I have my reputation to upkeep here. You know, I
We
mean,
won't tell anybody. It's a
I'm
secret.
the guy that watched Jimi Hendrix light his guitar on fire, so I do have a reputation to uphold.
Sure,
But
sure.
I was not a fan of Taylor Swift. I would have never in a million years admitted ever to hearing any of hers on the radio
Hmm.
prior to this album. But I'm telling you, you know, for anybody who likes poetry or has dabbled in poetry, I have got to give it up. She is a damn good poet. Her lyrics are unbelievably smart, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And the music's good. This is a very different album. This is not filled with like pop, you know, radio songs. These are very uh, dark usually, but fantastic lyrics. So I will put her on when I'm printing, and every time I listen to that album, I'll hear something new. But your photography began way before you even moved to New Mexico, and I thoroughly enjoyed some of the pictures that your very talented mom took of you. I think there's one of you almost twirling. It was at White Sands, or it seemed like sand dunes. You were twirling as a young
Yeah, that was the sand dunes in Colorado,
in
which is
Colorado.
if you're driving from Denver to Santa Fe, it's the
Uh,
Great Sand Dunes. You can hit it in the middle. I think we were actually on our way to Santa Fe when she took that picture of me.
I think that is a real premonition. That's a very important picture that shows you you looked so confident and so strong, and you're still doing it, you know? But you could see it even at that age.
We were en route to the place that I would spend. Well, I've been here for 20 years, but I will be here longer. So
Yeah.
no, I'm grateful. She introduced me to the medium. She was just making photographs, and I thought it looked like fun. And I remember making a decision early on that that was just something I wanted to be part of my life.
When you look at her pictures, uh, she certainly, you can tell instantly, she is not just some mom. Those are not family snapshots that every mom took. You know, that is a committed person who was trying to make art really, and it really shows. So you were a great model for her.
We had a lot of fun doing that. Well, and you shared a darkroom with Joel Peter Whitkin.
Yeah, we were in the same UNM grad student darkroom facility, which was called Sarah Reynolds. It was this old, it was already dilapidated when we were there. This is like 1978, the late 1970s, and it was falling apart already. I went back to UNM maybe 10 years ago, and it's completely bulldozed, rightly so. But in the heyday, when UNM was a dynasty for a grad program, that was our dilapidated dark room, and we all shared little dark rooms. And there are many wild stories of janitors finding. I mean, Joel tells this great story in one of his videos of printing one of his masterpieces of that man's head. You know, it's called The Kiss, as you well know, Madam Director. You know, one of his most expensive ones. And he says it's really expensive because he printed, lucky for him, he says, he printed his edition, you know, of 10 or 20 that night and had them on the drying racks. And the janitor came in and found them and figured out this is a human being's head that's been severed, autopsied,
Mhm.
um, and brought around to look like this old man is kissing another old man, a twin. So, the university came down on Joel. Wouldn't be the first or last time that he borrowed something from the UNM medical school. We'd all, Steve and I and others, the grad students, would go to the community refrigerator for a beer or something at midnight, and there'd be a baby fetus, in a jar in the refrigerator waiting for a Whitkin still life the next day. Joel, if you ever see this interview, I love you, man, and have the greatest respect. When I was in grad school, I was like 22. He was maybe 40 or so. He was in a league of his own, even though he was still earning his MFA.
Mhm.
He was a genius. He was arrogant. He was eccentric, just like he still is. But I take my hat off to him. We were all mere mortals compared to what he was conjuring up in his darkroom, for sure.
Well, he's still hanging out in Albuquerque, and
Yeah,
he's got great fashion sense. I really admire his
his glasses.
glasses and hats, and yeah, we've had some book signings for him at the gallery over the years. So
One of the most powerful things about a Whitkin photograph, whether it's a dwarf or a cadaver, in a still life, a head in a still life, all of these things are kind of impossible, and yet in his day he did make them happen. He'd go to Mexico where they have looser laws about handling cadavers than America, or France was lenient in lending him body parts for still lifes. And much of the power of Whitkin's work is that I cannot believe what I'm seeing, but it's photography pre digital. So it's got to be, it has to have been there. And I'm really generalizing because there were people like Jerry Yulesman, and from day one, people were able to manipulate in photography, in the
sure.
19th century. But allow me to generalize. When you look at a Whitkin, it's razor sharp, and damn, that deceased person is really lying there with a plant still life.
No, I'm pretty sure if Ansel Adams was around, he'd be using Photoshop, don't you think?
You're darn right, pal. As a matter of fact, I think he died somewhere around 82 or 84, which is, way pre-digital, but there was some digital in the air. And there are statements by Ansel Adams saying that if I were alive into this digital age, he acknowledged digital photography or electronic photography. He said, I would certainly be exploring it. Because, Ansel was always interested in state-of-the-art technology.
Mm-hmm.
And Hasselblad would give him he was so famous, companies, Polaroid, Hasselblad, Nikon, everybody would just give him stuff, so he always got the newest technology. So you're right, Ansel would be open to it, and it's legit.
There's that beauty to the handmade object, which I think is definitely something that inspires you and has always inspired me. And not to say one thing is right or wrong, just they're all tools.
That's right. And you pick the right tool for the job. And digital can do things that old-fashioned gelatin silver prints could never do. I was wondering if you were going to ask me for my favorite artists, and I would say it's a kind of an ever-changing list. First, at my immovable, godlike top of the list is Anselm Kiefer, who is, as you know, is in the photography world and beyond. But one of my current favorites is Kate Brakey, very well, very, very well.
Do you have a favorite? She works in a lot of different processes. Is there, like, if Kate was going to send you a gift tomorrow,
Wow.
I mean,
Wow. Tough one.
is there an image or one of her processes that you would pick? She does colored work, the gilded work, photograms.
I might I might, like so many people, I first discovered her when through her, masterful hand-colored
Mhm.
birds, which I think really put her on the map, and that's enough for one lifetime. I mean, Kate, is so amazing. She gets my award for like the most prolific photographer on planet Earth.
Mhm.
Um, she had a show at your friend's gallery, Terry Etherton, down in Tucson.
Mhm.
I think she had 140 artworks on the wall, and Terry gave her a little trophy that says "Wall Whore." I bow to her for output. I mean, she's mind blowing. But I only mention her because here she is, the queen of non-digital techniques, beginning, oil paint on gelatin silver prints, flowers, birds, put her on the international map. But then she started doing things uh, that needed digital technology. I mean, if I were going to have a gift from her, I might go with her trail cam pictures of coyotes and things. She must live in a wild neighborhood down in Tucson or somewhere.
Yeah,
But she set up a trail cam and she's just got javelina and coyotes and bobcats coming up and sniffing her trail cam. But I mean, that's digital. So she chose the right tool.
exactly. That wouldn't, obviously, for example, a pinhole camera would not have worked. That
You're
project,
so the
I know,
gear.
would have been something very different. But that's actually one of my major pet peeves is when I hear people look at a piece of artwork and say, "What is that Photoshop?" That makes me crazy. I feel like it's like saying, "Is this a hammer?" The
Yes.
piece of artwork is not, the artist used Photoshop to achieve those results, but
That's
it's not, no, that is not software. It doesn't just make itself.
good.
Um,
And that's a great succinct explanation. It's not software. It might be there might be electricity involved, somewhere in a monitor or something, but it's not software.
no, no, the computer did not make that piece of art for that person. Ideas and skill.
I still happily have my own darkroom, and I love going in my darkroom where there are only like 10 major decisions and pitfalls and disasters and treacherous things that could go wrong. Like my enlarger bulb might blow, or my developer might be exhausted or something, versus the digital world, where like there's about 1,000. Well, in Photoshop, there's 12 ways of doing everything, 12 different ways to do everything, 12 different ways.
Oh yeah.
You- And then your printer is green all of a sudden. I mean, I have the worst luck in the world with digital photography. People will tell you that I can stand next to your computer and I could crash it just standing next to it. I kid you not. So I mean, if I'm going to make a digital print, I'll come up to my workstation and I'll hit print, and like the printer will die or it will refuse to print. That's me. That's definitely me. I'm just underscoring your point that digital is not at all easier.
No, yeah. Some people think a digital print, they just hit print
Oh,
and
God. They've never tried to make a glistening digital print the way
no.
people you represent.
Well, Brian, I feel like we could probably talk for the next 10 hours or so.
We'll cover it at Burning Man all night. A 12-hour conversation.
But I should go tend to my carne adobada that I'm
Yeah.
cooking. But I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon. And we really appreciate everybody who's listening. This is still a pretty new show. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, that's really helpful to keep the conversation going. And thank you, Brian.
And Kelly, I sincerely thank you too for what you're doing. And you're amazing in many different fields. And I, like you, I think anybody who's made it this far, I think you should take up gum printing because you too are a glutton for punishment.
Well, thank you, Brian. No, it's been really fun. And actually, I'm just going to toss in last time we got to see each other in the real world was in California. And I think we had kind of talked about we would see each other somewhere again soon. And I think we said either New Mexico, California, or somewhere else, but I don't think we ever thought it would be when you were in California and I was in New Mexico. But
before Zoom was ever invented.
Real life is better, but this allows us to connect. So that's really cool.
Well, thank you, and keep up the good work, and you're doing great.
Well, thank you. You too. And we'll talk soon, and have a good night.
Thank you. And good luck to everyone else too, in life and health and creativity.
Absolutely. Stay inspired.